Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And it's so wonderful and so inspiring to have human beings in a room where we don't come near me. And we all pray that we're all going to get home safely and be safe in a week's time. So please do all your sanitizing you need to do so that you feel comfortable when you leave here. We are going to have some drinks and snacks afterwards, so please don't rush away. But I do believe we've got to be out of here by 8:30 this evening. So I do think Julie, if you follow her, might find somewhere else. Julie's our master, and she will ensure that we are going to enjoy our evening as well. So thank you for joining us. We have an amazing few moments. We're not going to absorb too much of your time because you are here to network. That's what the whole point is of our networking evenings. But we are going to listen to what happens in the city. And we're going to spend some time with Robert, who's going to tell us how he got there, why he's there, what he does there, why the city works the way it does. So I'd like to introduce you to my guest, Robert Hughes-Penney, who is an alderman of the City of London and the Corporation of London, and we will understand how that all works. So if you'd like to just introduce yourself better than I've just done, it's always better to introduce yourself. Only in a sentence or two, please, sir. And then shall we get into conversation?
Lovely. Yeah. Well, Sharon, thank you for your invitation. It's great to be here, Master. Lovely to see you as ever, and wardens and past masters. And as you say, it's lovely to be together in a room, and so pleased that we could meet this evening, having had to postpone from November when events were against us. So it's great to be back. Thank you for the invitation. Quick sentence then on background. My day job is investment management for a business called Rathbones, based here in the city. Been working for them for far too long, nearly 30 years. Prior to that, spent a few years in the army, which was a great experience. University, school, and so on before that. Married with 3 children.
Right.
And lived just
good, decent human. Good, decent human being.
And spent my childhood in South Africa.
Well, now you say got that one right. Absolutely. So just to break the ice, we're in South
Africa. Well, you'll know, I'm sure, a place called Pietermaritzburg.
Oh, yes. In KwaZulu-Natal, as they call it now.
That's right, yes.
Fantastic.
So those of you that don't know where that is, it's sort of halfway between Cape Town and Johannesburg, roughly.
Yes, going off it. If you understand how geometry works, the triangle, that's all the point of the triangle, heading out towards Durban. Yeah. Wonderful that you're spending some time with us. It's really a fascinating part, and we did some research amongst our members as to what they wanted to hear about. And there are a couple of those that are in the room with us this evening who gave me some feedback. And one of the feedbacks was, what is the city? How does it work? Why do you keep talking about the corporation? How does it all work together? And these are people who are potential members of the livery company. But then chatting to a few people who are in the livery company, I said, oh, that'd be lovely to actually catch up and understand, and get some sort of inside workings of the city. So to start off with, you're an alderman. Where does an alderman come from? Where does an alderman go to? And how does it actually fit within the corporation structure?
Very good question. And I'm still finding out. I was elected about 3 years ago.
So you're newbie too.
I'm relatively new, and in an institution that's been around since the 12th century. There's a lot to learn. But anyway, you might sort of reach to the dictionary initially to sort of look at what the definition of an alderman is. And I did that for your benefit, save you doing it when you go home. And it says, a person governing a kingdom, district, or shire as viceroy for an Anglo-Saxon king. So there you have it. But my kingdom is very small. The square mile is a square mile, and it's subdivided into 25 wards. One of those wards is mine, and I'm the elected alderman for that ward.
And which ward is that?
It is the Great Ward of Cheap. And you might say that's a strange name. Cheap is not monetary value. Cheap is Old English for a market. And if you think Cheapside is in my ward, and is where the market took place in medieval times. And now, if you think about the Ward of Cheap, if you walk down it, it's actually in many ways a shopping street. It's one of the main shopping areas within the City of London. And the fact those shops are there is a product of it being a market in medieval times, and it's retained that tradition of being a market.
Have you ever read the book London by Rutherford? And it's one of those, every chapter goes through a sort of century of London, how London's evolved. Amazing book. It's well worth a read. You've given us what an alderman is. We're going to talk about where that takes you to, but also just in the beginning is what brought you into it and what could be your next steps.
I was, when we came back from South Africa, I was educated at the Haberdashers' Aske's School, just north of London. And the Haberdashers' Aske's School is one of many schools that the Haberdashers' Company oversees. And it was my privilege to host deputations of the master and the wardens and the clerk when they came and visited the school on their annual visit one particular year, and got chatting to them and thought, oh, that's interesting. And then after university in Sandhurst in the army, started work in the city and thought I'd like to be involved in something outside of the 9-to-5 job that was giving an opportunity to give something back to society, community. And so in a slightly cheeky way, I went and knocked on the door of the Haberdashers' Company and said to the clerk, I don't know if you remember me, but and he was a very fierce retired Royal Naval captain who'd commanded a ship in the Falklands and had the ship sunk under him. And I don't know if any of you have ever went into the old Haberdashers' Hall, but you went into it and there's a big hallway with a minstrel's gallery where the clerk's office was at the top, and he came out of his office and as this sort of little boy in the hall, and he stood on the balcony and he looked down, peered down at me, and he said, "Oh yes, you are who I thought you were." Anyway, he said, "Well, I'm sure we can find a place for you in the company. I can help, but do you know anyone else that's a member of the company?" And remarkably, serendipitously, it turned out that my then chief executive for the stockbroking firm I was working for was a member of the company, as was my last commanding officer in the army. And so between them, they proposed me and seconded me, and I joined the Haberdashers' Company and have been a member of that ever since. And for those of you that may not be familiar, it's about 200 yards or 100, about 150 yards in that direction. So close neighbours of this location. And then was a member there for a while. One of our fellow haberdashers, about 15 or so years ago, became a sheriff of the City of London, and he held an evening a little bit like this, to talk about the role of the City Corporation and what a sheriff is. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I'll go along and find out. I was drawn to the city because I was interested in financial services, wanted to run portfolios of stocks and shares, which is what I continue to do, but had always also been interested in the political world. But with a slightly independent streak, I'd never wanted to be part of a political party. And the City Corporation, by tradition, is non-party political. So where we stand for election, we stand as independent members, not members of the Tory Party, Labour Party, Liberal Democrats, or Greens, or whatever it is. And so I thought, well, actually, there's an opportunity to stand in elected office in politics while at a nexus with financial services. And so through that meeting with the sheriff's name was Shepherd Nigel Branson. So through Nigel, he encouraged me to stand for election as a common councillor initially, which I did and was elected. And the journey has gone from there.
And
so,
where's it?
Beware anyone here. There may be a route into becoming a common councillor.
What happens? You have the alderman, and you talked about the sheriffs. So that's one of the features. Can you just explain how the sheriffs work in relation to the Lord Mayor of the City of London?
Yeah. Well, going back a step, if I may. So the City of London Corporation is the government for the City of London. Sometimes people often refer to it as a local authority, and it has many local authority functions, although technically it isn't a local authority. It's its own unique organisation. It predates, or it goes back to the 12th century, the Bill of Rights that were given to the citizens of London in order to form a council and freedom to work and live and trade, was actually the blueprint for Magna Carta. So it predates Magna Carta even. So it's the world's oldest, longest continuous municipal democracy. It's got a wonderful and amazing history. So within that construct, there are two courts, two groups of elected members. One group is this group of aldermen, 25 aldermen, 25 wards, one alderman per ward. And then there are 100 common councillors, and you can do the maths. 25 wards, 100 common councillors, it averages 4 per ward. But it's not as simple as that. Nothing is in the City of London. It varies between 10 members and 2 members, depending on the size of the electorate for the ward. And you can stand as a common councillor, and your term will be 4 years, subject to re-election, or you can stand as an alderman, where your term is 6 years, and again, you can stand for re-election. If you're looking to go to become things like sheriff, there are 2 sheriffs in any 1 year. Traditionally, one of them is an alderman and one is non-aldermanic, often drawn from the livery community. This year is unusual in that there are 2 aldermanic sheriffs, but don't be confused by that. And then, so an alderman would be elected and then would express interest in going through and serving in higher office. Available to serve, I think would be the expression. And then the next step would be to seek election as a sheriff, when you spend a year as sheriff supporting the Lord Mayor. And then a year or 2 later, you seek election as Lord Mayor. So the Court of Aldermen is the pool of candidates from which the Lord Mayor is selected. And across those 25 aldermen, very roughly, let's say half are past Lord Mayors, one is a Lord Mayor, one's a sheriff, and the other half are available to serve at a future date. And we work very closely with the Common Councillors. We sit together once a month for the Court of Common Council meeting. The role of the alderman in many ways is to lead the small civic team for their respective wards, but importantly to support the Lord Mayor as he promotes City of London UK financial professional services.
So the prime purpose of the Corporation of London, can you just give us quite briefly what it actually does for the city? You've given us one quickly now, which is to promote it in the wider world for financial services. But I do know the Lord Mayor has quite a high office internationally. If you could share that with us as well.
So yes, the Lord Mayor has multiple titles, but his job is essentially to act as a government, or his or her job is to act as an ambassador on behalf of the government, promoting UK financial professional services. UK financial services employs about 2 million people across the UK. It contributes more than double the next biggest industry in the country in terms of turnover and tax. So it's a massive generator of wealth for the nation. Generates something like £70 billion a year of tax revenue, which provides a lot of schools, a lot of nurses and doctors and hospitals and armed forces. So it's critical in many ways to the well-being of the nation. And so the Lord Mayor's job is to promote City of London UK financial professional services across the UK and also internationally. And for pre-COVID times, the Lord Mayor would usually spend about 100 days a year traveling around the world, drumming up business for the UK. But besides that sort of important ambassadorial diplomatic role, the city does an awful lot domestically within the city and within the sort of wider environs of London. Some of them are sort of historical legacies, some of them are modern sort of contributions to society. I've written some of them down to remind myself, but The city runs the Old Bailey, the Central Criminal Court, where the most heinous crimes in the country are prosecuted. Criminal crimes are prosecuted, and it's a wonderful facility, and probably, I like to say, the best run courts in the country. So we run that. We run something like 11,000 acres of green spaces, including Hampstead Heath, Epping Common. I live just west of London near Burnham Beeches. We run that. So that's contributing back to society. The food markets, we've got Smithfield just next door, but there's Billingsgate and New Spitalfields, which shortly, well, a few years' time, are going to be consolidated to a new combined markets unit. So the running of those markets. There's housing across London. If you're travelling around London, you may often see this city coat of arms on flats and blocks all around London. I know you're involved in some schools, so the city runs a range of schools and academies, 8 academies in Islington and other nearby boroughs, and 7 independent schools, the local schools here in the City of London, boys and girls, but then also the Christ's Hospital and places like that. Culture is a massive area that the city resources in terms of the Barbican Centre, Guildhall School of Music and Drama. The list goes on. London Port Health Authority, and as an interesting adjunct to that, there is at Heathrow an animal reception centre. So when you're bringing your iguanas back into the UK, if you're coming in via Heathrow, they'll be checked out at the animal reception centre at Heathrow.
And what influence or impact or relationship, jurisdiction does the City of London have in relation to the Thames?
Well, there's the Port Health Authority, so it's sort of responsible for that. The Lord Mayor has a title of Admiral or Captain for that, and then interestingly, you've got the bridges over the Thames. So there's the bridges across the Thames in the vicinity of the city. The city has historic rights and responsibilities for. There's the Bridge House Estates Trust, which gives some £20 million or so of money away to good causes, the poor and needy, a year. And that is the product of the city having owned these bridges for hundreds of years. And if there's any mathematicians in the room, if you've got a penny and you compound a penny over 500 years, it grows to quite a large sum. And that's essentially what's happened. The city still has responsibility for the maintenance and upkeep of those bridges, but whilst that's still an expensive activity, it's a relative. It doesn't take all of the income, and the surplus is used for helping the poor and needy.
Looking forward, we've had a rough time in the city. It's been bare, it's been barren, no one's been there. We've all been sitting in our kitchens getting fat. The kettle and the stove are too close by. Where do you see the city going now that we are sort of 2 years into the COVID pandemic, hopefully on its way out? How do you think the city will cope? What could be thrown at it, and how might it cope if another nasty comes?
It's been quite sobering, hasn't it? And I had COVID, thankfully, very lightly, and I'm sure others in the room have, and no doubt friends and family have, and some of us will have known friends and family who've been seriously ill, and sadly one or two have lost their lives. It's been a deeply sobering and traumatic experience, and we're still recovering from it. In addition to that sort of physical pain, a lot of people have also struggled with mental health issues. Just the inability to meet like this. I think we were made as social beings. We need one another, and generally we like spending time with one another. So and we've missed out on that, and so that's been tough. In a typical year pre-COVID, there were something like 525,000 people, over 500,000 people, travel into the city every day to work. At the worst trough, that number fell to about 25,000 people, 5% of the total. So, if you imagine going from over 500,000 people down to about 25,000 people, that's a huge shift in terms of the land. And my ward, as I said, water cheap. I was coming into the city, I think it was October 20. I was walking around my ward, and one lunchtime, it's 12:30, and if you know Cheapside, it's generally a pretty busy street at lunchtime. I was standing just by near St Paul's Tube with my back to St Paul's Cathedral, looking down the road to Mansion House. There wasn't another person inside. It's 12:30 on a Thursday lunchtime. It was extraordinary, very sobering. Thankfully, people are coming back. And that is a good thing. When Boris made his announcement a couple of weeks ago on the Wednesday, I thought, well, I came into the office on the Thursday, I thought people will be around. Nobody around. Well, maybe people will come in on Monday. They're giving themselves the weekend to get ready. I came in on Monday. Nobody around. Thankfully, today, 1st of Feb, there's a marked pickup. And that's encouraging. And I think I'm convinced that the city will come back, people will come back, and it will prosper. One of the reasons why we've all sort of bomb burst over the last few years is because there's been a couple of years because there's been nothing happening here. And so the fear of missing out has been non-existent. There's been nothing to miss out on. Once gatherings start occurring, once business starts getting done, then people will be attracted back in a sort of city context. If there's blood in the water, then the sharks will come. Not saying the city is full of sharks, of course, but you get the sense. But then there's also just being present, and however much we want to look after people who are not present, stuff happens. And a good example was back in October. At the end of the mayoral year, there's often a big charity ball in Guildhall, and I'd taken a table of 10 people for that charity event, Lord Mayor's grand finale, and I'd been to Cyprus with my wife for a short week, came back, and the night before the ball, I got the text from the NHS saying someone on your plane has been tested positive, therefore you must now isolate. And so, these tables were not cheap. I was in the office, it was about 4:30 in the afternoon. And you don't have a lot of time to act. You don't have time to go around everybody that's not in the office. So I looked up and said, right, you two, what are you doing tomorrow evening? You're now Mr. and Mrs. Hughes-Penney, hosting a table for me and my wife with some of our top clients. And I'm afraid they were the ones that were in the room. They got the opportunity. And that's what I mean about the fear of missing out. Yes, we want to be inclusive. Yes, we want to reach out to people who are not in the room. But sometimes,
out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, and sometimes you need to make quick decisions, and you do it with who's present. So I think that will take effect. That said, I think the world has leapt forward 10 years in the space of about 10 weeks in terms of its use of IT and technology, and that's a good thing. And to give people flexibility around the edges, coming in a bit later as it suits them, or leaving a bit earlier as need be, and then logging on later in the day, I would applaud and support that. My thesis is still that on a 3 to 5 year basis, we will have well in excess of 500,000 people back in the city on a regular basis, and I even put on a 5 year basis, I even put the number out at 700,000.
Wow.
Not coming back 9 to 5, 5 days a week, but people who are based here, who see the city as the locus of their activity. And an example of that was last summer. As we recognised, very few people coming into the city to work, and I'd walk down Cheapside and I'd look at Has restaurant on the corner there at lunchtime, and it was heaving. And I was thinking, where are all these people coming from? They're not coming from my office, but it was full. But I think that's an illustration of just the social nature of human beings. And when they were coming to the city, they were coming to the city for the city to be what it's always been, which is a meeting place. And they were coming to meet their friends, meet their colleagues, meet their clients, and do some business. And they can sit at home to look at screens. They didn't need to come to the office to look at screens anymore. But they were coming to the city to meet with others. And I think the city will continue to serve that function going forward.
interesting because the need for us to talk and to be together is definitely drawing. And you're seeing a lot of companies and a lot of managers are saying, I want my people back, and I want them back more than they used to be. But I think what we have gained is a tolerance for home working when appropriate. So I think there's a tolerance that would never otherwise have grown. So I think that's very positive. Now, my last question, if, God forbid, in our lifetimes, in the city's lifetime, something as awful as this happens again, what have we learned, and how do you think we might handle it differently as a city?
Well, let's first of all hope and pray that it doesn't happen again in our lifetimes. Sadly, we know that things like viruses are part of the world and the natural world in which we live, and they do rumble around from time to time. But in terms of what have we learned, I think one of the groups of people that have been most significantly affected are the smaller businesses. The larger businesses like the big banks, investment management companies, and the law firms and so on, they've been able to move to remote working pretty quickly, and have been able to carry on doing what they're doing. But the SMEs, the small medium-sized enterprises that are critical to the ecosystem of the city have really struggled, whether it's the suppliers of peripheral services or whether it's the hospitality and leisure sector. And the more that we can do to underpin what the support they give for that critical ecosystem, the better. The City Corporation initially set up a £50 million fund to help them. There was rent and rate relief that was given to occupants. There's additional funding being introduced latterly. But it's sort of having that perspective to provide that safety net for those businesses in the interest of the city as a whole.
One of the things that a lot of companies talked about at the beginning of this 2-year scenario we've been in is we don't need our offices anymore. We don't need all the space anymore. It's all going to turn to housing. What's your thought on that now, where we sit 2 years down the line?
It's that was spoken of a lot. Curiously, through the pandemic, the planning applications for office space in the city, if you'll excuse the pun, have gone through the roof.
That's incredible.
So the developers are seeing that future need and opportunity to build more offices in the belief that people will continue to want to come
offices, not accommodation.
Offices, not accommodation, not residential. Yeah. I think the way we use the office space will change. We become more flexible. I was talking to our chief operating officer yesterday. And we're reconfiguring our office space, as a lot of businesses are, to make it more flexible, more agile. So people aren't sitting like sort of battery chickens in on stacks of desks, but there's collaborative workspaces and things like that. Those workspaces, those collaborative workspaces, may take up more room.
They do.
So that maybe there's a bit of ebb and flow in supply and demand.
And also just not, as you say, being like a battery chicken and actually having the space for a human being to be comfortable in is a different change as well. Last one is, I know you wanted to talk about how the livery can support the Corporation of London. So can we leave that as your last question before I open it to the floor?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you're a livery man or woman of a livery company, you are part of the electorate for the Shrewsbury elections and the Lord Mayor's elections. There's one for the sheriff, one for the Lord Mayor each year. So if and when you're a liveryman of this company, do take the opportunity to come along to Common Hall, as it's called, and vote for the Lord Mayor and the sheriffs. That is in your gift. At another level, if you are working in the city, you have a vote in the elections for common councillors and for aldermen. The electoral list is refreshed every year. I'm afraid the current one is just finished, so you'll need to wait till the autumn of this year. So do look out for that. If you've already got a vote, the Common Council general elections in March. So do make sure you exercise your democratic right to vote. Encourage your colleagues to vote. If you live in the city and you've got a vote as a resident, then vote again. So it's so important that you do exercise that right to vote. There's also lots of other ways, and I think in a sense being involved in a livery company like this, you are participating in the wider sort of fabric and society and community of the city, which is good. There's ward clubs. Watercheap has a ward club. I think where we are now is Farringdon, and Farringdon has a ward club as well, which is more of a social gathering for the local community. And then there are also a number of external bodies that the city has, and there are opportunities for individuals to serve on those bodies. So they're not always just made up of aldermen and common councillors. There are sometimes some sort of external appointees. So if there's any particular sort of areas, maybe it's school governors and things like that, there are opportunities to serve, and I can leave a list with you. So if people are interested in those opportunities, ask Sharon later.
Thank you, appreciate it. For those of you who are not yet members of our livery company, there are forms on the table just before you go out. You're welcome to start joining us if you haven't done it yet. I'm going to open to the floor before we're going to close, but David's going to give us our final words.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
If I may.
No, question time, absolutely. And then
we, as you know, are child secretaries administrators and actually governance professionals. And there has, I understand, been a governance review at the City of London Corporation. So I'd be interested if you comment on that and explain why we weren't asked to help.
I think in terms of the last bit, my friend James is a common councillor, so I will invite him to look himself in the mirror and answer the second part of that question. But the first part is, I think, is the more substantive part, and like any organisation, there are sort of layers of bureaucracy that build over time. And when you've been when you're part of an organisation that's been around now in 1,000 years, there's a lot of layers of bureaucracy. So we recognise this, that decision making wasn't as swift as perhaps it could and should be, particularly in the modern age, and that we would like to improve and up our game in terms of delivering service and support to the community. So a couple of years ago, we asked Lord Lisvane to undertake a review of the structure and operational functions of the Corporation of London, which he did. And James and I and other elected members spent a lot of last year going through that report. I think it was also shared with the livery, so there was an opportunity to feed back from the livery through that sharing process, just to try to streamline. Local authorities don't always have the best reputation in terms of quick decision making, and to that extent there was some similarity between the corporation and other local authorities. So we wanted to sort of streamline decision making, make it more efficient, better value for money, and so we're now in the process of implementing those streamlined changes.
Well, as a governance professional and a board evaluator, I'd be very fascinated to hear what the changes are. There was a question that.
Hello, Andrew Holland from Warwick Educators. We're very aware of the way the city not only invests in support within the city, but also in the city of London and beyond on an international scale. But it's an odd question, but we see the city as, corporations and businesses and so on, but what about the people? How many people actually do you, in your exchange, represent and deal with within the city? How they feel this is part of their.
I think that, in a sense, goes to the 500,000 people that are coming into the city each day. The number of residents is a fraction of that, less than 10% of that number. In my ward, let's say you've got that 500,000 people coming to the city divided by the 25 wards, and so there's an average number of people. In a way, that's what for the 25th, that is what I represent. But not all of those people have a vote. The city, and I should have said earlier, sort of implied it, I think, is unique in that residents have a vote. So if you are one of those residents in the city, you are eligible to vote in these elections. But the city also has a business vote, and it's the only area in the UK that has a business vote, recognising this sort of mismatch or unusual feature between business and residents. And the way the business vote works is if you are a sole practitioner or a partner of a partnership, then you're eligible for a vote. But 20 or so years ago, that franchise was changed so that incorporated businesses were also eligible to receive votes depending on the number of people working in that location. And it's on a reducing sliding scale. So if you've got 10 employees, you might get 3 or 4 votes. But if you've got 100 employees, you don't get 30 or 40 votes, you get 20 votes. And those votes are given to individuals within the business. You are encouraged to have a representative salami slice within the business. So it's not just all the board get the votes. It's the chairman might get a vote down to the person in the post room, and then they're all free to vote according to their best judgment as to who is best going to serve in elected office their interests.
And to all of you, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming in person. And please stay as long as you can until we're thrown out of here in an hour's time. And enjoy a glass of wine and some nibbles on the company. And please ask any of the questions you have of any of us who are members. Listen to Robert, listening to what happens in the city. I hear every now and then how the bits and pieces work. And to actually speak to somebody who is relatively new, who tells it to us in simple terms that we can all follow, it's actually very, very helpful. So thank you very much. I do appreciate it. And thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Council, that's right.